6 minutes before top of the hour 10, you're still tuned into News and Views. Myself, Salalo Makudera, and I will be heading over to eSwatini now. It is often presented as peaceful kingdom, beautiful country known for its mountains, its culture, and its warm hospitality and warm people. But when you flip through the pages and try get insight on what lies beneath that image, activists and pro-democracy movements say there is another story, one that is marked by political restrictions, one that is marked by fear, exile, and unanswered questions following the deadly unrest of 2021. I'm not sure if you remember, but 5 years later, many families are still seeking accountability. They're still trying to get still need to be addressed by eSwatini and the wider international community, which unfortunately has remained largely silent. So today, this morning, we asked the question, why does eSwatini receive so little attention on the African continent, and what has happened to the call for democratic reform in that part of the continent? And we'll be having a really interesting conversation regarding that with Thokozane Kunene from he's the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Swaziland, and he has been in the struggle for pro-democracy in Swaziland since the 1990s, and he's going to be giving us more insight on the call for democracy in Eswatini and why not a lot is being said about what's happening in that part of the continent, as I mentioned. Babu Kunene, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Sawelo, and thank you for having us in your show.
No, pleasure is all ours. I want to kickstart the conversation with, what was at the top of my intro, what many people, especially in the SADC region, seem to not understand and know about the reality of what's happening in Eswatini. And as someone that's been at the center of activism and the push for democracy rule in Eswatini, can you just paint a picture for us? What's the situation like, and why are we not hearing as much as we should about Eswatini compared to other countries on the African continent?
Thank you. It's very phenomenal. It is actually attributed to the history of our country, why and how we find ourselves under the absolute monarchy. You will recall that the background of the history of the Swazi people has not yet been spoken about. It is only about the monarchy and colonialism. That is where the starting point is. And subsequently, from 1973, the people, when they were starting to show up their true identity to define themselves in the historical process, there was an immediate intervention of the 1973 decree that banned political parties and suspended the constitution. A country that has lived for up until 2008 without a constitution, but fully recognized not only by Africa, but by the United Nations. You can imagine a country ruled without the law. So meaning therefore that the absolute monarchy was in one way or another legitimized by the international community. But actually, historically, it has been not accepted by the people of Swaziland. That is why there's a traceable history of struggling since then and up to now. And the 2021 uprisings was not an era. It is just a culmination of the strength that the people of Swaziland have been gaining. In the face of a silent world, the silence of the world actually is informed by how the world of Africa today is. The world is under capitalism, a system that actually supports any dominance of a minority over the majority. And the Swazi situation is actually one example. And being rude as it is and being brutal and ruthless as it is, actually it is sustainable in the sense that the world will say it also resembles what are the characteristics. We are quite aware also that in a democratic world of present-day capitalism, what matters most is that are the ruling class people of the world benefiting from whatever system. It could be fascism, it could be any other system like ours. But as long as it survives the system, it is correct. The ruling elite of the people of the world, the United States, the European Union, South Africa in particular enjoy the extraction of wealth from our country. They benefit, they see the monarchy and the system as actually a workable entity that supports them to actually gain what they can gain from our country. And I think in that case, it becomes supported in that way. And the uprising of the people actually made the people, not that they do not know, the world is quite aware of the situation in Swaziland. It is not their problem up to this far. It is a problem of the people of Swaziland. The conscious people of the world support the people of Swaziland because they are aware that this is abnormal, that a family can rule over a majority and continue to subject this majority into abject poverty, diseases, and also undue suffering, including brutal and violence from state orchestrated missions, just to keep it going. What we have seen is that the people, the elite of the country will always check, of the world will always check what are the balance of forces in Swaziland. If the balance of forces shows that the monarchy can still survive, they will support and work with the monarchy. If they feel that the people of Swaziland are getting an edge over the monarchy, they become to have somehow a critique, not just an opinion. They normally say a critique. That's why 2021, the issue was that the people of the world, and South Africa in particular, and SADC is the main factor, were saying, how can they help the monarchy to survive? And that's why they were talking about reforms. The monarchy must balloon, must allow some form of reformism or reforms that can accommodate the growing strength of the people. But instead, what happens? The monarchy offered an option. The option was, they can survive the monarchy, they can survive this absolute monarchy by force. And then the countries supported the force in one way or another. But in the course of justification of the support of the force, they also wanted to expand their influence and their extraction in the country. That is what happened after 2021. We have seen an expansion. You might have recalled South African banks like FNB can close branches in South Africa, but can open a branch in Swaziland. You might see the relationship of that. And many patterns of other countries have done so. We have seen the European Union, and there's growing expansion of this interest from our country. People are displaced from their own communities and are forced now to work to serve the system. Workers in the country are exposed into working without jobs, working without wages. And the wage theft in Swaziland is legitimate. That is why we have seen financial institutions that are not actually Swazi brute, but they are making a lot of profit from the school fees that the people of the country are paying in the banks. So the transaction of the lives of the poor is always managed by the financial institution. How can they avoid to support such a gift that is being given? But unfortunately, it happens while the people of the country are suffering and they are continuing to struggle. That is why we continue to struggle and say, what matters more is that the conflict that exists is that the minority that is illegitimately exposing or enforcing itself over the majority is abnormal and will always be influence the people to act in another way. That is why our duty and our role is to say, when is the right time and what are to apply the best way to make our people to realize their goal. That our people must ensure that whatever force, whatever support the regime gets cannot necessarily diminish the aspirations and the interests of the people as long as they fight for their survival. And they've done so all the years. As they've survived, it means they've got a right also to achieve their objective and make sure that Swaziland one day becomes a free and democratic country.
Thank you so much for that. I want to come to, and you touched a bit on it, the 2021 uprisings. I think it was one of the first times where Eswatini was thrusted into the spotlight, where people started reading up and trying to understand the lived realities of the people of Eswatini. How has activism and the organizing of people changed after 2021? Because it's almost 6 years since that, and we haven't seen anything that followed up those uprisings, at least as an international community. I'm not sure if as South Africa we qualify as international community, but generally, because as I mentioned, 2021 was the first time where we saw Eswatini being thrusted into the spotlight. There were conversations around it. People started understanding briefly what is happening and the lived realities of the people of Eswatini. But after that, it looks like momentum was lost. Were there any changes? Was the regime slightly more brutal to try and quell some of these uprisings? That's why we've not been seeing and hearing about Eswatini as much.
The reality is that the reaction of the regime after 2021 was to rely on mercenary forces, an external force that came into the country, where we have seen many other countries, even European countries, who were also supporting, giving support. We have also recalled that there were a lot of former apartheid generals who migrated to Swaziland and gained citizenship. They are running a mercenary machinery that is actually now built up within the state, within the military in the country. They were applying the force that the people in 2021 were not ready actually to overcome. It was a new phenomenon that actually expanded in our cause of suffering, in the suffering of our people. From that period, the Communist Party and also I have also been involved with other forces to make sure that we make the plan that comprehensively accommodate all the elements that are a factor to the repression in Swaziland. That is why it required us actually to combine almost all forms of struggles, to think in a better way that when there are no spaces for peaceful means, what other means become available? It has been always a process of going through that, not only to think, but also to make the necessary preparation, to make sure that the people of the country cannot, at any point when they stand up, they must face the brutality. There are fights like we must engage into a decisive course of action that must make sure that we overrule almost all the mentalities of the absolute monarch, including the orchestrators of the monarchy, because we are quite aware that the monarch and the absolute monarchy has not been expanded, developed from within Swaziland. It came in as a cause of imperialism. It was imperialism that said we want to survive in the country, but we want a system that will make sure that we guarantee that kind of condition. So what happened in that period is actually we have seen the brutality, the harsh people are still in prison. And we are also aware that there are mass graves that are not yet even investigated by the international community. But what we have seen SADC has said is that they actually want to minimize or to belittle the brutality to make sure that they can create a fresh relationship with the monarch, whilst at the same time, they were giving the most required support to keep the legitimate system in power. And in that case, therefore, we have seen a cement. That's why we have seen a lot of flow of leaders within the region and internationally coming in and out of Swaziland just to endorse. Even at some point, you can see that even meetings that should have not been taken place in Swaziland, they were convened international meetings just for desperation to make sure that the people of Swaziland are trapped under the absolute monarchy. Whilst these forces are able to extract maximum, because they are quite aware that the monarchy is vulnerable. It cannot survive on its own way because it cannot mobilize its own effort and its own force within the ranks of the people of the country. Then they will manipulate that situation and make sure that they survive the monarchy by making sure that they give it the external strength. Our people and our struggle now is faced with what exists now as a global phenomenon of what exists. We are aware that Mswati has been moving in and out of the country to mobilize weapons from Europe so that they can support the mission. And we are aware also that the people of Swaziland are fighting not only an absolute monarch on its own, but they are also fighting a SADC and a force that's supported by SADC and forces of fascism that exists inside our country. We might have seen also that the maneuvering of finding that some what they call the prisoners that are transferred to other countries that are coming from the USA coming to Swaziland, and that of course all the leverage of maneuvering the country. You are aware of normally that a prisoner that was supposed to have served a sentence, moved to his own country or whatsoever, is taken to Swaziland under a very falsified mission that the international community and even the UN is actually failing to dismiss, that they must come to Swaziland but have the leverage to go up and do some surveillance that are acting in the country and out of prison, supported by the state, to make sure that they identify and pinpoint second target for themselves. That is why they've created the situation that our country is now an environment that is a hybrid of not only the monarchy, the brutality of the monarchy, but also of international and global fascism. And if you want to attend to that situation, it requires that nothing else but the capacity of the people of Swaziland in their own struggle to make sure that they can match those kind of standards. We have been busy actually responding to this kind of challenge in preparation and in planning and in organizing. That is why, in one way or another, we say what has been happening in the country was not attractive, but what has been attractive is that there are maneuvers to make sure that there is always maximum extraction of the wealth of our country. And there's always a maneuver to make sure that the other forces are increasing their support to the dictatorship, making the struggle of the people to be even more difficult. But what would be a struggle without difficulties? It can't be a struggle. For our people of the country, of our country to gain what they want to gain, they must suffer, and actually they've been suffered. But at the end of everything, they must actually suffer the last fight and ensure that they endure to the last moment. That is what the Communist Party is busy canvassing and organizing. And we believe, therefore, that the moment is actually coming that our people will respond to reinforce what happened in 2021 by responding actually to the other practical dynamics that didn't exist by then. So our people, I think they are ready for that. We are quite aware that by that time, the people were actually have trapped the monarchy. It was unable to breathe. It was only international imperialist forces that came up to make sure that they resuscitate the monarchy and place it with some form of new brutality now to make sure that they are able to keep the situation and our people in that way. The international media and the internal forces to our Swazi situation to play around with it. It is because in particular, how can they expose their fellow patriots who are busy mingling with the affairs of our country? If in any case, we'll say the public media is expressing its view about the problem in Swaziland, at the end, they will expose the dynamics that what was the world doing. If the people of Swaziland are now silenced by the brutality, but what was the world doing? The world has been involved and busy supporting the reactionary government, supporting the brutality. And in this case, any media coverage would actually have to expose that. That's why actually the media had to mute developments in Swaziland. But the people of Swaziland has always been suffering worse than they were after 2021. And in this case, therefore, as long as they still survive, it means therefore they still have the capacity and the potential to free themselves.
I always view every conversation, every interview as a moment of education, and we rarely talk about eSwatini, and we don't understand, I think, the political landscape of eSwatini as much as we should, especially South Africans and the rest of the SADC region. I want to talk about the political systems. We know, at least some people know, that political parties remain banned in Eswatini, and the country is operating under a system. I think it's called Tinkhundla, if I'm not mistaken. For our listeners who are unfamiliar with the system, for education's sake, how does it work, and why do pro-democracy movements like yourselves believe it limits political participation?
Thank you. Since 1973, when the constitution was promulgated, all powers were vested in the king. And the system was created 3 years and 5 years later. The system called Tinkhundla. It was a system that was actually expected from the ruling elite, from the monarchy, supported by imperialism. The imperialism by that nature, it was British colonialism, imperialism, and also apartheid, to say it cares to survive and find itself in contact with the people. And the Tinkhundla system has been a machinery, an extension of the monarchy to control in communities. It has placed itself in communities to make sure that it monitors and supports the military to monitor the people. And this kind of monitoring and supporting also by the chiefs, it created up a modern system that can allow imperialism to also facilitate the monitoring of the population under an absolute monarchy, a non-democratic state, a state that actually, as it stated, not only to promote the monarchy, but it also silenced the people. As you stated clearly, that it banned political parties and activism, not political parties as organization, but it also banned political activism. It has been still not acceptable in the country to organize. The right to organize is still under subjugation. Trade union organizations are actually trapped to exist as association, to also operate within the very system that actually grinds them down. And that is how the situation has been. students and youth and communities are actually denied their rights to organize. And all protests and all activism about the people of Swaziland, it is on defiance. And that's why, at any case, you enter into any protest knowing very well that you are doing it illegally. There's no law that can support and defend you in doing so. And that has been always the situation. It has survived, but in the maximum, the criteria is to extract maximum wealth for the monarchy and imperialism and the ruling elite. So the system has always sustained that line. That is why the King of Swaziland is also known amongst the top 10 richest people in Africa. But in the main, it is also the richest monarchy within Africa, if it can be stated. And in that case, you could elaborate and state it clearly that from which economy, at the whole stage of the whole things, the people of Swaziland are living majority below abject poverty. And in the course of abject poverty, you could also state it clearly now that hospitals have got no medicine. And in the course of medicines, without medicines, we are quite aware that the monarchy is entrenched in all aspects of economic life. Is it in the public sector, private sector, and elsewhere? The monarchy is entrenched. Mswati and his family are all entrenched in all aspects of life. Corruption is actually to the maximum. Recently, the current Prime Minister, Mswati's Prime Minister, has acknowledged when we will say that it is the end of term of the mimic system of government, because the true sense is that in designing the system, it has been to a point that even though you can see vetted elected members of parliament, they are vetted in the sense that their first condition of participation and being involved is that you must be vetted by the chief that what is the state of loyalty to the monarch, and it must be confirmed that you must have pledged in several ways your allegiance to the monarchy by participating and also ordaining. There is this thing called kubutega, whereby you must also have a chain that symbolizes who are you. If you do not have that, you don't have a regiment name, actually you do not actually belong. You can't go through that phase. And that has been the condition. And in that case, they form what would be the House of Parliament. And in doing so, they are also told that you are serving a king's government, don't serve people. And in doing so, they are also subjected to discuss issues within the parameters that do not actually undermine the monarchy. They must speak on issues that support and promote the monarchy and also its governance and its longevity. That is why the system has always designed itself to make sure that nothing else for the people but to support and sustain it. And then they've got an upper house of Senate whereby there are 30 members, all of them vetted and determined by the monarchy, to make sure that any legislation to pass through, it must have gone through that kind of a structure where there are princesses and also members of the royal family and extended families who are actually subordinating to that. They are all of them extracting the wealth of the country by making sure that all public service resources are actually paid to them as salaries, even though they've got unlimited access to state resources through parastatals and also have to put in the private sector on land. They have full control. The people of Swaziland do not have control over land. The system is designed that it's only the king that has got right over land. People are actually staying in the land on the mercy of the monarch. And all those are the entities that define this. And it's created up a system, an economic system that makes sure that all companies operating in the country under TBO, they must actually accommodate the TBO. And the TBO fund is a separate fund that doesn't go to the national treasury, but only serves under the king's office. And making sure that the king will always, and the monarch will always have to be survived by the wealth, where big industries, the sugar industries and all other companies who TBO have got these shares, maximum shares, will always make sure that the king has got upper hand. There are 51% shares in Ilovo, 51% shares in almost all companies that are operating in the country, and making sure that they decide where and how should the wealth or profits go to. And the process are actually directed in that siphon system. The people are just players. They are observers in the whole course. But those who are working under the system actually making sure that the system is survived. And making under those conditions, it clearly stated that whoever operates and find a business and an operational space in the country go through via the monarch and must have made maximum pledge to the monarch, equivalent pledge that is designed by the system to the monarch. You can add more if you have got more, but otherwise you cannot do less. All those that are working, doing business in Swaziland are doing it on the basis that they serve the monarch. And how are they compensated? They are compensated on the basis that there is almost free labor in the country. People are paid just to make sure that they can travel, go back to work. They do not, they've got no life, they've got no livelihood. And that is how the system is being designed. So it is giving the support on those kind of bases. So the Tinkhundla system is actually operating within that kind of a situation. And at the same time, it is keeping the army, it is keeping the police to make sure that the people are trapped into fear and into, if they overlook the fear, they will be exposed to brutality. So that kind of violence is the nature of how the system is. So it is keeping, it's a system that is actually now operating where there are no people involved, but it is the political elites that are governing, that are organizing the situation. It is more like a private entity that is acting on the basis of protected by law, that there is actually no entry without actually having all the necessary requirements. So the people of Swaziland are just spectators, but they are not spectators, but they are victims of the system. In the correct sense, you would say the system of Tinkhundla is a system of the monarch and political elites that has subjugated the entire people of the country as victims of that system. That is why they always characterize themselves as poverty. And that's why most of them are living out to South Africa to find a livelihood. But actually, even they are persuaded, they're pursued, whilst they're still in South Africa, to make sure that they pay certain amounts to the monarch, as long as they have the Swazi identity. The South African system also have created the angle that there must be some loyalties that the people, Swazi working in South Africa, have to pay to the Swazi regime in one or another. That is why at some point, when the monarch is bankrupt, it will go out to South Africa and then ask for money, because it knows that there's a free labor that it has pushed out to South Africa to work for the monarchy. They must not work for South Africa, they must work for the monarch. When South Africa doesn't put more resources, they will always want to complain over the land that they've also leased out to South Africa on their own voluntary basis, and say they will blackmail the South African government over that so that they can get more money to pay for the monarchy and also to support the regime. So that is the game at which it is being played, and that is the reality of the situation, that what is happening in Swaziland, what is neighbor with South Africa doing and saying about that. It is actually this kind of phenomenon. Does it fit in the South African political context? In one another, it doesn't. That is why at some point in the whole rank, it will say it can only survive on the basis of political elites in South Africa who want to find a playground in the country. And also it is within the Southern African Customs Union, a design by the British colonialism, by British colony, to make sure that British companies operating in Swaziland, they must always make sure that there's a pledge to keep the Swazi monarchy intact. For what reasons? There are geopolitical reasons that imperialism have in Swaziland, to say they also have to find a space in that territory to work on that. So Swazi people are victims of interests that are beyond their interest. If the people of Swaziland express their own interest, it will mean they will have developed their own system. And what kind of a system? It is a system that will make sure that there is a full participation of the entire population in the decision making, in the organization of the country, and also in the sharing and distribution of the wealth that the people of Swaziland will have created on their own. So I think this is the journey that our struggle has to go, and I think that is legitimate journey for that matter. And that is why we all still, even though circumstances do not necessarily favor us inside and outside the country, but I think because of that historical mission requirement, we feel therefore that it is still and remains a mission that should be accomplished. Our people deserve also to have to champion their own lives.
Well, there you have it. Thokozane Kunene, the Secretary General of the Communist Party of Swaziland. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and for those wonderful insights. And I think very, very important perspectives on the realities of eSwatini and the lived experiences of the people there. Hope we chat again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And with that, we've come to the end of today's edition of News and Views. Thank you so much for staying with us for the past 2 hours and almost 30 minutes. I'll be back with you again next week, Tuesday, for yet another wonderful 2 hours of conversation, of education, I think most importantly, from myself, Salailo, and the rest of the team. It's bye for now. Shap, shap.